Good afternoon. How are you? Well, on behalf of Thomas Jefferson, I want to tell you that the temperature is now approximately 80 degrees and the humidity about 52. Seems to make sense. And the wind, there is some breeze, is at 5 miles an hour. So what's the big deal about today? Today is the day we render a vote. Virginia is one of those places which you could vote today, and Holly and I did just that. We went to vote and we watched to see that there were many more blues and Democrats. And when I say we went to vote, we went to where the electoral board is kept in Loudoun County, where I live. And when we arrived, all the parking spaces were taken, but opening up almost as quickly as you arrived. These were all voters. At the front door to the polling place, there was a Republican stand and a Democratic stand. There were few Republicans. This is non-scientific because I only stayed there a few minutes. But there were a lot of people hanging out at the Democratic side, getting a sample ballot as if they needed it, and a lot of bonhomie saying hello to one another. It was a marvelous demonstration of democracy at its best. People turning up on the first possible day they could in Virginia. There have been reports since that the turnout to report before Election Day was a record number. This is important because Democrats bank votes, if you will, by how they vote early. In fact, both Holly and I had absentee ballots, and we went in person because we thought this was so important. It had to be done right. And the reason we had absentee ballots goes back to the pandemic, and we thought we could find a way to do this without causing any trouble to ourselves. When we got there were long lines, but they moved quickly. Inside the voting place, there were, by my count, about 10 stations for people to visit, confirm who they were, and then to get a ballot and vote. We asked, of course, to confirm that we could vote, even though we'd asked and was on file that we wanted ballots that we could file by mail. No problem. And the people were very kind and very helpful. But one of the most fun things of the day was while online, as it was moving along, people would say to one another, "This is your first time voting." Older adults, myself included, would celebrate the fact that they were voting, and you'd see some slight embarrassment that for their age they'd be singled out for doing something good that they may not have appreciated was so significant and so important. When we got inside, as I said, and people were being checked in, when it was a person's first vote, these young Americans, these citizens, what they did was they rang a bell and everybody cheered them. I don't know if it's happening elsewhere, but it led to the joy, if you will, to the happier warrior aspect of what I think democracy is and should be about. It's a grand adventure for good, and it's a cure for what ails us in the sense of fighting back and resolving difficulties and working them out. Not with lies, not with power, not with aggression, not by diminishing others, but because that's what people do for each other. That's what they should do for each other. That's what government should be about. The significance of the day is that there's a message being received. And the message is, this is like no time in American history. This isn't like when our democracy began, when it was less a democracy because only property people could vote and slaves and indentured servants could not, and women had the rights only of a chattel, a piece of property. Sure, Lincoln freed the slaves in the Emancipation Proclamation. We had an amendment to the Constitution so that blacks can be treated as equals. This was slow coming, but it was a significant step forward, given that our original sin was how badly we handled the slave issue. And we made the compromise that gave us the Electoral College, which is going to bite us in the ass this time if we're not careful. So we have to go out and get as many people to vote as possible. Women finally got the vote in 1920 in the 19th Amendment, if I'm correct. And it was a trade-off for supporting the temperance bill that would outlaw alcohol, which made a few fortunes for some prominent Democrats, who had already, by the way, been in the at first, legal traffic in alcohol. Then we have a couple of important things happen in 1965, because we still aren't getting voting right. We have a Voting Rights Act. And in that same year, if I'm correct, no less than Bill Douglas wrote the opinion in Griswold against Connecticut, which said a woman had a right to be let alone and to take the pill, and that we had no business going into their lives and telling them what they could or couldn't do. In 1972, you would think the nation was ripe for equal rights for women. And the proposed amendment went out and was circulated, but wasn't approved by anyone. Roe v. Wade gave, if you will, a confirmation to women that they had domain over their bodies, that the choices were up to them, in a formula that was set forth in Roe v. Wade that depended on Griswold against Connecticut. Connecticut was the state that had this stupid-ass law. And I can't say everything was coming up roses, but there's no question that it was a violent assault on our understanding and presumption of the rightness and precedence of Supreme Court opinions like Roe v. Wade, when Alito took a step that is probably a large part of why we are going to take the White House back, and it was that he overruled Roe v. Wade with other hacks on the Supreme Court. And we have suffered in this period since assaults on women and blacks, the young, the old, people who have certain sexual preferences, identities, all of the above. So today, when against a background of blood and suffering and denial and humiliation, Holly and I were allowed to vote. To say, not by throwing a lever, but filling an oval, expressing our choice for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, and for a local congressional candidate. And this can make all the difference. I say can because it's up to us to make the difference. Holly and I are not done. We have just taken another step in our part, like every other citizen, and we'll contribute some money, we'll spend time knocking on doors, we'll send out postcards, we'll talk to people, because that is America. And better to be fighting with words and processes that vitalize our country. So from a king who would tell us that we should pay for King George III's governance, we said no taxation without representation. And we say now we have the representation that we want. We just need to swear them in. And we, the voters, are the ones who get to choose. And it affects what happens in the Electoral College. So don't kid yourself that in the 6 or 7 states that are considered the battleground states, everything we do in every state where we make a contribution makes a difference. We have the clown show with the hateful aspect that Trump embraces and has forever. If this were an IQ test and presented in the abstract, not having lived through it, no one in his or her right mind would choose Trump. I had a conversation today with a person that cut my hair. And she is a Trump supporter. Not a thoughtful woman, seemingly. But I said, if you know a person is a liar, and you're relying on their promises of what they're going to do, why do you expect that's going to happen? And I did make one exaggeration, which, if it were the facts, the context, it might be true. And it is, I would vote for anybody with a heartbeat over this bastard. And I think when you consider that the anyone we're talking about is a lot more than a heartbeat. She's given heart to our reform and to this election. She has shown herself to be a leader. She has hit the points that are necessary. If you want to find out what a person is like, you put them in the middle of an impossible situation, and you see how they perform. Years ago, I was asked about a possibility of me going to work in the White House. And the fellow who would be my patron, it turned out left. But the conversations I had with friends were interesting. They thought going to the White House and working there, that's like getting M&Ms that have the White House emblem on them. And I said, no, that's not what it's about. It is the place where all the impossible situations go because they couldn't be solved anyplace else. And we have to, or whomever is responsible in the White House has to figure that out. We've had a chance to see how Trump handled that miserably. An embarrassment to the nation, compromising our security, our health, our education, our equality, you name it. Whereas, compare Biden and Harris. A very different approach. An approach that makes us think from Obama, we went to Biden. From Biden, we went to Kamala. And so, it is my hope and my belief that Kamala will be elected. And Tim will be the person who may be elected after that to the presidency, not just the vice presidency. And we have to work at this, and we have to be ready not only to get that broad band of vote we need, but we have to prepare ourselves for the criminal assault on our processes, which we already see developing in Georgia, in which the Republicans and the Trump machine, through 3 people that they have identified and put on their board of election, who says every vote has to be hand counted in addition to the machine. That is a revision that would cost time and start bumping up against the statutory and constitutional deadlines that have to be satisfied. But if it's impossible, we can do it. So I want to thank you for listening with me, and see if you can mimic what Holly and I did, if it's suitable to and doable, or get an absentee ballot, because they'll probably be going out now if they haven't already where you are, and vote. That's something you have to do. But the second thing you have to do is have some emanation to some other citizen and encourage them to vote for Kamala and Tim. And it can be any number of ways. It can be a conversation. It can be writing postcards. It can be going door to door. It can be making a small contribution. Whatever it is, do it. It's not too small. It's not. Because what we do when we join together is unassailable. Trump knows that now, and I think he's already decided the only way out of his cul-de-sac is to attack the entire system on the day of the election and the days afterwards. So we have two objectives: win the vote as large as we can, and then bloody their noses with their criminal behavior. So that's what I have to say, and I say goodbye to you from my cathedral of trees until tomorrow. Bye-bye.